Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
And welcome back to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. This is Chris Parker, and I'm having a conversation with Arjan Postma, who is known as Mr. Unconventional. And we're going to get into what that means because he is a maker, thinker, doer, innovator, just an amazing person. I'm feeling very fortunate to have a moment of his time. We met, I guess, I don't know, I want to say 10 years ago or something.
Yeah,
during
decades, I think, yeah.
one of the iterations of one of his initiatives, which are always amazing, and keeping track of them is always educational and inspirational. So, Arjan, thanks for joining. Can you share with us, and I'm really curious what your answer is to this question, what is it that you do and why do you do what you do?
Ooh, that's the toughest question right at the beginning. Why do you do what you do? That's like a daily mantra, I think. So I think I can answer in a few different ways. I think from a very personal perspective, let's say we talk about entrepreneurship now, but from that level, I'm usually asked to join projects when the conventional ways are not working. So if the classical business strategy ways are not really working, so that's why I got my nickname Mr Unconventional. It's just a gift and 2 decades of training to see the hidden assets, the hidden relations in things, and to try to bring them forward. And I've been trained as an engineer, as a designer, as in business school. So I'm bilingual in that sense. So I'm usually asked to help see those relations, to kind of manifest them, to show, hey, this is also possible. And in addition, I love all this know-how, as you can see around me, but I love people and I love working with people. So to manifest these new ideas with people within the organization, to really make something possible, that's what I usually do. And that's tough because almost every organization I've met is geared around continuity. So not changing, but staying on the right track. Creativity and change is taking a lot of energy from your brain. So your whole body is resistant to and wired against change. So you really have to take people on a journey and to show them it is possible. And so that's what I'm usually doing. If I'm really taking it more from a company perspective, then all the projects I'm working with are with clients who ask me if I can help them to become what they call future proof. I like it to call future ready. And that's a kind of advisory and training. So I like to help them become future ready, but to focus on what we call the decision making process first, because how you design your decision making is the key aspect if you're future ready or not. So that the decisions you make today will have effect, the strategic decisions in 7 years. So the decision-making design is key to anything about the future. And it has been proven, not by me, but many smart people, is that decisions tend to become better. Not if you have more data, like the trend towards smart decisions, but I talk about wise decisions. The quality becomes better if you bring more alternatives into the equation. So not stop and go, but try to get more and more alternatives into the equation. The decision-making process is improving your quality of the decision-making. And the interesting part is, it's not just an alternative. It's usually an alternative against the edges of what your world is right now. So they need to be relevant. It's not like a trick, but try to find those alternatives which are challenging you a bit, because then your decision making will improve. So this unconventional thinking is also the core of the companies I work with, because that's their key question in the end. So how do I find these relevant, unconventional alternatives? And that's where I help them.
I think we might be having a conversation for the next couple hours or days based on everything that's in there. Before I jump into future proof versus ready in decision making, before we started recording, you mentioned a Japanese approach or principle called Jengu. And if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
I would love it if we can define that and introduce that, and then use that sort of as a platform for some of these other conversations. Because I thought it was a marvelous insight Can you share that story?
Yeah. Well, let me start off with that the unconventional thinking, and if people want to become an unconventional thinker or whatever, it's usually seen as creativity and it's like a gift and a talent. And people say, I'm not creative. I think everybody's creative. It's of course we have multiple kind of talents, multiple levels, but everybody's creative. But the key principle for me in trying, if someone wants to try to be more unconventional, is that you have this pattern recognition skill, that you see a kind of system in things and try to find the key pattern. And Jingo, as you mentioned, is one of the patterns we've worked with. And um, every company, every venture I've started was always geared around the aspect of being a living lab. So I don't know if it's smart, and I've done a lot of things I wouldn't advise to other entrepreneurs. It's not very efficient, but I always love to kind of practice what we preach to the max. So everything we would be advising our clients we would have tested on our own bodies, on our companies, on ourselves. Um, so Jingu is a Japanese ritual. It's a community which is kind of rebuilding their temple, I believe, every 30 years or so. And that's not very efficient because the temple would last far longer. But in 30 years, there's a new generation. And by really taking the whole temple down and rebuilding this wooden temple again, it's keeping the craftsmanship within the community. So all the skills necessary to build this temple remain within the community if you every generation rebuild this temple. So it's for maintenance and safety, etc. But it's also a ritual about craftsmanship, which I love. So one of the ventures I started was Freedom Lab. And from the beginning, we said we're going to use this Jingu organizational principle. So every 5 years, we're going to quit the company, to cut the credit cards, say bye to our lease, pay our employees because they are fired. And we come back in the office on Monday and we start the company again, but only with those elements we would like to take on for the next generation. Because I've seen in many adventures that the entrepreneurship is there in the first few years, then it's kind of there in the next few years, but during the whole ride, we lose the entrepreneurship. So if there was one craft I would love to keep in the company, was this entrepreneurial spirit. So that's why we said we're going to do it in several generations of a company. So in the end, we made 3 rides of 5 years. And I think I met you during the 2nd edition of Freedom Lab, which by then was a research company. And I think the 3rd edition, we wanted to share and be far more participatory. So we moved from a consultancy kind of company into a campus model, which was far more about education in the end. So we kind of reinvented ourselves multiple times.
Well, and I think definitely not conventional. And I'm curious if we're playing with future proof versus future ready, did it work? Meaning this renewal every 5 years as keeping the spirit and being I don't know, anti-fragile or ready for the next. Did it work, or what is the main lesson or two that you took from that?
I would loudly say yes, it worked, and I would say never try it at home because it's taking up so much energy. It's scary. It's taking energy. It's emotional because the day you say bye to your lease, you hope the building is still there on Monday and nobody's trying to hijack it from you. And so I don't know if it's very smart thing to do. But it helped us a lot, specifically in these beginning from startup and scaling up, to really ask this question: why do we do what we do? So we were building software during a few years, and then when we cut the company, we really had to decide: are we a software company, or do we need to leave the software building to other people, or is there going to be a spin out for someone who's building the software? And so it really helped us to stick to the core. Specifically, I think in the 3rd edition, we continuously work with these kind of principles. Our principle was to have no employees, which was by tax law not allowed back then. So we said we want to keep the company size to a minimum. But on the other hand, we were with 150 inhabitants of the campus. So the organization for me felt like 150 people. The company, the entity, was only 3 or 4 people. And and that was very challenging because it really it was really bootstrapped. It was lean in the let's say the organizational part. It was very rich on the value, on the working together, the getting things done together. So the impact part. So did it work? Yes, it worked because it really helped us grow in the areas we wanted it to grow. Is it the most efficient way? No, I don't think it's a very efficient way to organize yourself. Um, but I think that I think for all the ventures I built, I think they were not very efficient. I think they were far more built around creating value than being extremely profitable.
Hmm. So that's the difference between the creating the value maybe for others and capturing value for yourself. Is that the differentiation you're meaning?
Yeah, I said they are for me. They were always social entrepreneurs, social enterprises, and because in the end we said we want to have impact, so a good outcome from the employees, for the company ourselves, for our clients. So if we had profits, then it was okay. Then there were salaries, the building was there, we could invest in new products. But we try to not maximize profit, but try to invest it in the organization ourselves. So in that sense, it is a social enterprise. What I learned throughout the years that if your company and your people are very engaged with the company, with the goals of the company, with their environment, if they are very engaged with the clients and the impact you're making, if they're very engaged with learning, and if the learning is really almost institutionalizing in the right sense of the word, then this social value is always turning into economic value. But if you do it the other way around, try to have economic value and then put 10% in a kind of NGO kind of thing, or do your voluntary project. It remains kind of two separate worlds. So I always try to focus on social value first, and from as a derivative almost grow in economic value. So, but in the end, I've learned that they can really work together, economic value and social value. They can really, but if you start from social value first, because then you have impact, and when you make impact or make a difference, there's always a company to
There's
run.
always value to be captured there. So, great. I'd like to go back to this future proof versus future ready, and a little story from my life right now. I'm doing some coaching work with some architects with a bank. Bank has a green logo, and what they're talking about is a future state architecture, and it's extremely detailed with at least what they're desiring to build. And my initial reaction was, well, how can that be true? Because you don't actually know what the future is. And so wouldn't it be nicer to have a future state ambition to have the basic framework and principles and guidelines to have discussions and make decisions faster? And that's what I'm championing. And it really resonates with me, this, future proof versus future ready. And what I've read is you really advise business leaders not to aspire to future proof. So I'd love to jump down that rabbit hole, also just selfishly, because I'm wrestling with this right now with a really fascinating project with a bank.
Yeah. Well, let's take the jump then into that the rabbit hole. First, I want to mention is because I've had this discussion in many different occasions, and of course, one of the first things I hear, but it's just language, and but specifically if you're working on future, for example, or change, there's always the debate, is it about structure or culture? And I think everybody who works in change knows how important culture and people are if you want to really make a change happen. And the way we see, whether we decision makers or employees, the way we see the world is described in language. So language is everything. So don't come and say, it's just a word. No, these words really, if someone is a client, a user, or a patient, automatically puts things in a different perspective. So future proof and future ready are very different. And future proof for me is like, waterproof. When your watch is waterproof, it means you can take a dive or go in the shower and the water won't touch your watch. That's what it said. It's engineered to make water stay out of it. So if your company is going to be future proof, it means the future has zero impact on your company. For me, that's equivalent to being dead. It's like a big dead oak tree. It has no leaves. It's still standing there. It's maybe even looking beautiful. But at the first autumn storm, the tree will collapse because there's no life in the tree. So future proof for me has nothing to do with the future. It's trying to almost protect the now. Future ready, and specifically futures ready, like you said, you don't know what the future is, so better prepare for multiple kind of futures. So futures ready is far more about agility, and agility almost as a capacity, not like the book or the methodology agile, or it's not a state. It's more like this capacity of agility. And the interesting thing about agility, I've been playing baseball all my life, and agility is one of the key things we have to train over and over. Of course, it's like standing on your toes, but not like a ballerina, because you will tip over. It's like a bit in this, we call it in a triangle position. So you are robust and agile at the same time. And I think that being future ready is about this fine balance between on your toes. So you have this anticipative power towards futures, but also some intent, what you want to achieve in this world with your company and your people. So there's also some robustness. So leveraging that balance point, we call it the dynamic equilibrium, that points, that's what for me future ready is about. And then when I usually work in boardrooms, then say, oh yeah, we want this anticipation, we want to be future ready. So now we need to know all the futures, and then we know for sure we're ready. And that's exactly the nuance. When you want to be future proof, it's about protecting the now, but you cannot know all the futures which might happen. You can train yourself in it, but you need to learn to deal with this part of not knowing, to be uncertain, that it's too complex to understand. And that's what for me future ready is about. And also when I'm playing baseball, if I fall down the stairs, the first thing I do is grab onto the rail. And that's the problem, because we don't want to fall. But we have to learn to understand which part you're holding on to, because that's your blind spot. That's this thing you don't see anymore. So moving from future proof, which is about protecting the now, towards being futures ready, is about agility, but also learning what hidden beliefs, understanding fixtures you have where you try to hold on to, and let them go a bit and try to see how that works for you. So for me, it's a small word, but it's a huge difference.
Well, I think the power of language is frequently underestimated. And my background more in technology leadership, with corporates, for example. I call myself an organizational technology leader, meaning, don't ask me to configure your cloud infrastructure. That you don't want me coding. Never give me a keyboard. But shifting that organizational culture and inspiring some of these, I guess you call them attributes, is what I love doing. And and creating those, use different, creating different patterns for people to that resonate with people. One of the things that just really irritates me sometimes about language is when IT people say, well, the business and IT, and I'm like, well, who's this mysterious business then? Because what business today is not an IT company? So why do you, with your language, differentiate yourself from whatever you think is magically happening over there? Because this is completely artificial. So if you need language, call that maybe the operational business and your business technology, but somehow find a different, language to associate that is more together rather than apart. And
I think that you really hit the spot there. I think that in the way we organize, whether it's the state or a company or communities, we usually use stories of separation. We try to distinct ourselves. So you are business and you're IT, you are management and you're not, or you are a competitor. And I think we need to move towards more a different kind of language and different kind of stories where we need to connect. Because as an architect, it's all about networks, and networks are about cooperation and connection, not about separation. And it's language indeed, but also I think it's almost the image, the metaphor you have in your head. And this crazy idea of business and IT stems from the balance sheet, where business was on one side, it's the money you make, and IT was a cost center on the other side. So that's why we have distinct those. But if you want to create value, you need both. And what I love, if you talk about words and metaphors, that every organization we have, we still try to, even if I would play Pictionary, would make the hierarchy like the tree, or I think it's from 1910 or something, that image. If you talk about companies, we talk about Porter and Five Forces, or those kind of models. Those are all models which were inspired by the combustion engine of cars. It's input, it's output, there's energy, there's a spark. But we're now living in a world of IT where the stack is the main organizational architecture around there. So what would happen if we would take an organization and talk about instances, network of networks, microservices, containers, stacks? So use those almost these patterns, these organizational patterns of the technology, and try to look through those lenses towards what organization is about. Because now we have like high-end technology and Stone Age ways of organizing, which are not really very coherent. So I think metaphors, language are key components about understanding change or breakthroughs in the end.
Wow. Okay, that just hit me like a ton of bricks as far as something profound. So thank you for that. Meaning this similarity of pattern, and the reason I'm oftentimes called in when people's agile transformation has failed because they got some agile book and a checklist and they tried it and then pissed everyone off, and they're like, well, what happened? And some of the things that you can instantly ask and say, well, how has your technology pattern, to use your words, matched your human pattern to match your, call it your business or your channel pattern? Because through that, if you have a value, so sorry for the buzzwords, but if you can create that value stream through those patterns, to use this word, then you have the opportunity for velocity and flow. Because I try to get rid of the A word, the agile word. So if you're looking for velocity and flow through people, process, and technology, then these patterns, oftentimes different people are responsible for these different things. And then they're expecting, someone go to an agile training and then magically, triple their output. Like that's just never going to work. So I love the approach of seeing similar patterns across these different lenses of an organization. I guess it's all very abstract, but very meaningful to me. I love this stuff.
It's on one hand, it's abstract, but let's say a stack, which is just like a layered approach, is almost like flipping the company. It's usually nice. It's more like a Pantheon kind of temple. It's like silos with a roof. That's the classical architecture of a company. You kind of flip it to a hamburger model, so more like stack based. And there are reasons why we use the stack and why it's working, because we can take components out and shift components and those things. And I think that's an architecture you need if you want to work, let's call it agile or in flow or with high velocity. But I often see that people try to be agile but keep, let's say, the managerial architecture in the same way, and that's not working. So if you want to use these methodologies who largely come from technology development or software development, they work in a very different schema than your classical organization is. So we have to connect them. And usually when, for example, when there's a Scrum meeting and we have these daily stand-ups, and I see everywhere I go, I see people in this pre-corona in this small room standing around in a huddle, which for me is almost like, okay, how can you be cramped up for daily, let's say, start in this small room? And there's this one laptop because there are 2 or 3 engineers working from the other space. And I always notice that the laptop is always facing the manager of the group. So we stand in a huddle, we stand in a circle to get the hierarchy out of the group, to create this, let's say, level playing field. But as soon as there's a laptop, I can always point out who the leader is. And that's what is just a very simple example, that it's very difficult if you implement a methodology without understanding the philosophy behind agile. And I think for me it's far more important to create the agile mindset, to understand the philosophy of than the methodology, because the methodology you can mash it up, create your own. You can mix it up with Lean and Scrum and whatever. But to try to understand the four basic principles behind it, to try to understand the philosophy, will help you tremendously more than just the methodology.
I love it that you use the word, because this is what I just had this conversation today with a industrial group based out of Paris today. That, for me, agile is a mindset and a set of methods. And please do it in that order. you know, no, so I love it. So looking forward, I think we can have these conversations, and I hope we have more of these. I'm thoroughly enjoying this. Looking forward, you are, by the time this has been published, you will have launched a new initiative, a new platform, which is
Hope so.
which is wwxd.com. And to be very clear, that means www.wwxd.com.
Yeah.
Share the ambition of that whole project, because what would X do is a fascinatingly, teasing, seductive brand and
Yeah.
invitation.
Well, well, I think, like I said, I always like to use the ventures as a living lab. So kind of learn by doing. And I really fundamentally believe, but I come from a background of teachers, my parents. So from that you understand what you're doing better if you share. So that's why I've always worked Creative Commons as openly as possible. So learn by doing, and in the end, try to learn, educate, share with people, so you better understand what you're about and what you're doing yourself. So that's why I always said, let's try to build the ventures as a living lab, so we can experiment. And I thought, if I'm helping so many international clients with these almost impossible questions, how can I still be learning and not get into this kind of automated repertoire? So I thought, I need to take on a big challenge myself. So that's why I kind of took a new notebook and wrote on, Mr. Unconventional is building the impossible company. So I thought, okay, so how can I make the impossible company? And luckily Corona hit. So it was almost impossible to create a company. And I thought, well, if there's one brilliant moment in time to start a new company, when you can't have a building, you can't meet new employees, you cannot do anything, it's this, because it's challenging me on every convention there is in building a company. And what I noticed, I read this book from Hannah Arendt, and let's say there was this word, amor mundi, which said you need to love the world first before you can love yourself. And what I've noticed throughout the years is that a lot of, consultants and managers, how shall I say it? They look at optimizing the business. They look at the best practices. So they look very adjacent to what their work is. So if one grocery is looking at the other grocery, one consultancy is looking at the other consultancy. So we're all kind of copycatting each other. My background in future studies and so is more next practices, which is very difficult to learn from the guy or girl next door. So amor mundi for me meant, how can the world become my classroom? So not having a class like in between four walls, but how can I learn from every experience out there? So how can I learn from ancient tribes? How can I learn from nature? How can I learn from craftsmanship? How can I learn from totally different fields, very different personas? So that's how this question came up. What would X do? And I find it fascinating how much we can learn from all the beautiful things around us in the world, if you're just willing to look up from your screen, look up from the meeting or negotiation table, and try to see the beauty in different things. And they might seem very, not very relevant, but if you look through this pattern lens, so why is he or she doing this, and what is it about? You can kind of derive a few patterns, and then try to put it to your own application, and it will really challenge you, because everything around us is designed, is organized. Even ants or bees or viruses have organization schemata. So we can, if you want to learn to become a better organization, don't look at the Fortune 500 or the few companies around you. Look at all the organizational aspects around you in the world. That was, let's say, the core idea. So can we help people by challenging them bi-weekly with relevant inspiration to what they are about, showing them the difference in the patterns in different fields, and really applying it to their business. And
How will
that's
you
really
share these? How will you share these patterns? Meaning, I'm going to share a pattern that I discovered last night in a bit, but for WWXD, will these be videos or diagrams,
yeah.
words?
Well,
Like,
and that's we really try to practice what we preach to the max here. So I must say, I don't know. I have some ideas, and that means we are testing a lot, trying to see, because it's not about what I want to push on people. It's how can we really help people. So we're trying to experiment with that a lot. If it's language, it's just language. It becomes theory, and it doesn't. You need to embody these different fields. So that's why the video is a very easy one. But video has a tendency to become too easy. So you just sit down and you go to think, okay, so what's this guy doing? So it needs to be a mixture, trying to use the different aspects of the different media. And right now we're working with an interactive format, which has kind of multiple ways in scrolling. So by scrolling, you go higher if you want more abstract, or you go lower if you want more pragmatic. You go sideways if you want a different view. So we're experimenting a lot with different kinds of navigation in that, and then we can embed video and text. But yeah, embodiment is key. Recognizing a pattern as an architect, that's fun, but you need to embody it. And I had an example. Let's say like two very short examples. If you take Simon Sinek's book, it's somewhere around here. It's called Infinite. Reading a book, I think he states all technology at this moment is infinite. It's almost zero cost to add another gigabyte, so it's infinite. So that's why you keep scrolling infinitely in your phone. If all companies are using these new kinds of technologies, it means that their products and services are per definition infinite in the end. And if your business becomes infinite, that's the design principle, that's the pattern we're talking about. It's interesting that competition is no longer possible. You can run a soccer match for 90 minutes and you can do your utmost and you can run, but you can't do so because it's 90 minutes. If you have no clue how long this game, if it's 3 days, 3 months, 3 years, you cannot keep running. You will have very different way of approaching this game. So if all technology is infinite, if all companies are applying these technologies, it means that all companies have an infinite component, which means competition will kill them. The only way to survive infiniteness is either taking on new borders, but if you want to embrace infinite, it's cooperation. So this is just a very short example. If you can take a book and try to look for the key design principle, and then to apply it to new business. But a very different example for me was this movie I was watching on Netflix. I think it was called Jiro. It's about this Japanese sushi chef. I think he's about 90 years old. He's making sushi for about 80 years. And he has a Michelin star sushi restaurant. And it's somewhere in the subways. It has 11 seats. So it's the story power is already there. And he's been making sushi for 80 or something years. And every day he's making this sushi. And I was watching this and I was thinking, for me, that was typically something I couldn't do. I thought, I can't do 80 years, do the same thing. Oh, it's called like, it's like a drag. It's like Groundhog Day. That was when I was in the movie. I thought, okay, this is so not me. And that's why I was challenging myself. So what is it? What drives this guy? But in the end, while listening to him and I started reading up on him, it's so amazing that this is Japanese Kaizen. This is where lean comes from. Every sushi he made, he said it brilliant. He said, has the mindset of perfectness, but as an entrepreneur, he understood he could never be perfect. He tried to learn every day, every part of sushi. So if somebody came in his restaurant and he saw that they were right-handed, he would tilt the sushi a bit to the right, which would increase the eating experience for that person. So what struck me is that he has the same kind of drive and mentality like you and I have, but his scale is not try to be there version 1 Q2, version 2 Q3. No, it's about millimeters every day trying to be a bit better. So he has a different lens on time, but he has the same mentality with his perfect mindset, trying to improve, to listen and look at the customer, but he's doing it on a micro level. So what I learned from this is, what can I do on a micro level, almost in my daily habit? And if I increase it only 1%, then in a year it will be over 30%. So it's a very interesting principle. But for me, it struck me that was what that embodied Kaizen and the whole lean movement in one beautiful documentary. So I think that the understanding these patterns and being able and to apply to your business requires some amor mundi, have love for the world, be ready to be estranged, but also to embody it, to almost feel it with all the senses you have, and then try to see what can I learn from it, and not judge it or something, but just try to make it work. Sometimes it won't, but then you learn a lot. But my experience is most of the times you can learn from the most strange things around you.
And I have an example here in my hand of something that I discovered strangely that I brought into my bank project. But before I do that, the Simon Sinek book, are you talking about the Finite and Infinite Games book? Is that the book you're talking about? Okay. I would also...
That's my take on it. It's not that, but it's my take on it. And that's what I
would also suggest that there's an original book, like from the 1980s, called Finite and Infinite Games. And in there, also a profound book. I read the statement that all evil originates from someone trying to do good. And it's one of those things that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And talk about the ability for empathy. Other people say that, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. All of this is true. And so the subjectivity of good and bad. So I would recommend both of these books, and I'll put both links in the show notes. So yeah. Maybe, I don't know.
That's what I'm going to read the book, but what you trigger me here is that specifically talk about learning, and learning has been a field for me for decades. We always said you need to invite people and give them the ability to learn by being transparent, by being open, by being a good host. I think learning is not about indeed or trying to make impact or do good, about the dogma and saying, okay, this is how it should be done. So, and that's what I like about the patterns from in the world. They are there. They're already there. We help you see them, but you should do whatever you do with it. And but I do recognize if you want to make impact, we call it positive and negative freedom. So I want the freedom to do whatever I like to do, but if I'm like to keep pulling your ear, then and you probably say, okay, but now you're touching on my freedom. So you said you're not allowed to touch my ear. So that's where positive and negative freedom are always in collision with each other. And that's why we have to organize. There is no other way than to organize this. So organization is, I think, one of the most beautiful aspects of being alive in the end.
Yeah, and also the fact that no organization is perfect, because I think a lot of people that I know rage against the organization, and you're like, yeah, but these are just humans who have made decisions to organize in a certain way, and therefore it's imperfect. So, but a little story about Adjacency that again is from my today. Now is I love Tim Ferriss. He's one of my inspirations for podcasting. So Tim, if you're listening, thank you so much. One of his recent episodes was with a gentleman named Richard Schwartz about internal family systems therapy, which I had no idea about. And they actually did this sort of intervention process with Tim right on the podcast, and it was particularly meaningful because although I haven't listened to it, a number of podcasts ago, Tim shared that he had been abused as a child. And then this was sort of a continuation of a bit of that conversation. And just because I'm a curious soul, I ordered the book. And then I was reading this chapter, again, related to enterprise architecture at a bank. And I actually read this chapter to one of the architects to say, and like this, I think this is why we're stuck. because we are trying to change. Basically says, in addition, systems would try to maintain homeostasis. That is, a system would resist attempts to change it, especially if those attempts seemed ignorant of the context in which the behavior made sense. And so what basically this goes to this IT business thing again, that, okay, we as our, pointy wizard hats IT guys in the basement are saying, this is how you should run your business. And we're coming up with, okay, this is what the long-term future state architecture is. And then those people who are on the other side of the balance sheet are saying, what the F are you talking about? I don't understand you. I don't see you. And so for me, this was if you see this as sort of a complex adaptive system or an agent system of these humans playing and trying to optimize not only themselves, but what they believe, the better thing. If you're trying to create an architecture on a layer to support that, it must be grounded, to use your words that I'm now stealing, the patterns of the other dimensions of the business. Otherwise, you will fail. And I loved, Frank, I'm talking to you right now, Frank, the look on his face when we were having this conversation is these different little ahas were clicking of tuk, 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 tuk. And so in this case, what would X do landed so hard with both, him and I. And that's why I do what I do, because if we can find these little insights to go, and help people move forward and help myself move forward. That's what it's all about. So I'm delighted to hear about what would X do, because if I can get one or two more of those, then life is better.
Wow. I will do my utmost to get it up and running right now. And no, that's it's I said it's still for me. Mr. Unconventional is building the impossible company. So there are so many temptations to take the shortcuts and but now I love to really to keep polishing it and make it beautiful and small, so it can be used. It's not just like, oh, I want to shout out and this is how you should do it. I want to make something which can really be used by all kinds of people, when it's managers, when it's people working in the operation or anywhere, because I think it's just our world and life is too beautiful to not see it, and we can help each other see beautiful things in different occupations, different fields.
Arjan Postma, thank you so much
Thank you, Chris,
for your openness, your approachability, your challenging, your unconventional thinking. So I knew this was going to be a delightful conversation, and it lived up to every expectation in my mind. I really appreciate it. And I'm very, very, very curious how wwxd.com evolves over time, because this is an audacious goal that I think is beautiful in its intent and its purpose. And I can see definitely how it improved my life and others as well. So Arjan, thank you so much for joining. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite player, and download the Simplicity Kit from ebullient.com.